For Comedy Hype News, I'm Elena Williams. On September 25, 2018, Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison after he was found guilty on 3 felony counts of aggravated indecent assault against Andrea Constand, a former Canadian national basketball team member and trainer for Temple University's women's basketball team. However, on June 30, 2021, more than 2 years after the initial sentence, Cosby was released from prison after the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court ruled that his constitutional rights under the 5th and 14th Amendments were violated based on an unwritten agreement with former prosecutor Bruce Castor. So, how did we get here? What happened during the 33 months Cosby was in prison that made the state Supreme Court overturn the district court's decision? And how exactly were Cosby's constitutional rights violated? Here's why Bill Cosby was sent to jail, then sent free. The incident. The criminal case in question involving Cosby and Constand dates back to January 2004, when Constand alleges Cosby drugged and groped her at his home after a night out with friends. According to Newsweek, Cosby gave her 3 blue pills he claimed would help her relax. In a deposition, Cosby later said that the pills were over-the-counter antihistamine, Benadryl. Constand claimed the pills made her semi-conscious and unable to move. Later that night, she alleged Cosby touched her breast and crotch and put her hand on his penis. She claimed that she woke up in the middle of the night to find her clothes removed. After the event, Constand continued to keep in contact with Cosby and even took her parents to meet the comedian at a comedy show in August 2004, 7 months after the alleged incident. 5 months later, in January 2005, Constand filed a criminal complaint against Cosby, which led to a criminal investigation. Constand's mother called Cosby, who apologized and offered to cover therapy costs in Constand's education at Temple University. Cosby still maintained his innocence, claiming the sex was consensual. "I will not give in to people who exploit me because of my celebrity status," Cosby said during the investigation, in which both he and Constand were cooperative. The first criminal investigation. A criminal investigation into the events of that night was conducted, but charges were dropped in February 2005 after Montgomery County District Attorney Bruce Castor said, "I find insufficient, credible, and admissible evidence exists upon which any charge against Mr. Cosby would be sustained beyond a reasonable doubt." Castor had investigated the incident a month prior after Constand alleged that Cosby gave her some medication that made her feel dizzy, then fondled her. Constand said she later woke up to find her bra undone and her clothes in disarray. In response, Cosby's attorney Walter M. Phillips Jr. called the allegations utterly preposterous and plainly bizarre. The case was then dropped and the prosecutor decided not to proceed. 1 week after Castor's announcement not to pursue the criminal charges in March 2005, Constand filed a civil suit that would prove to be crucial both to Cosby's convictions and subsequent acquittal. 13 women were selected as potential witnesses if the case went to court. One of the anonymous Jane Doe witnesses alleged that Cosby drugged her coffee and she woke up with her clothes partially removed back in 1984. The anonymous witness later revealed to be Beth Ferrer. In addition to this, another woman, California lawyer Tamara Lucier Green, came forward in February 2005, claiming that Cosby had drugged and assaulted her in the 1970s. According to her interview with Matt Later on The Today Show, she was told what she was given was cough medicine. Cosby's lawyer said that Cosby did not know her and the events did not happen. Most of the lawsuits include sworn testimony under oath in the presence of a prosecuting attorney in the jurisdiction in which the suit was filed. For that reason, Cosby entered an unwritten agreement with Castor not to prosecute him on any self-incriminating evidence he may later volunteer as a consequence of cooperation with the civil case. In fact, Castor is on the record through emails informing his successor, Risa Furman, saying the purpose of the deal was to improve Constand's chances of winning the civil suit by minimizing the possibility that Cosby would express his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. In doing so, his decision to forego criminal action worked. Cosby ended up settling with Constand for $3.4 million without going to trial. But we know that agreement was not honored because testimony from that 2005 to 2006 deposition became key evidence in the trial that ultimately sent Cosby to prison. The deposition. Over 4 days in 2005 and 2006, Cosby was questioned by Constand's attorney Dolores Triani under oath. The deposition wouldn't be released to the public until further allegations were revealed, a decade later in 2015. During the questioning, Cosby revealed he received 7 prescriptions for Quaaludes for a sore back from a Los Angeles gynecologist and cosmetic surgeon, Leroy Amar, who died before Cosby originally gave the deposition. Troyani, did he know when he gave you those prescriptions that you had no intentions of taking them? Cosby, yes. Although from the deposition, it isn't clear how the doctor would have known that. Troyani, did you believe at the time that it was illegal for you to dispense those drugs? Cosby, yes. Troyani, when you got the Quaaludes, was it in your mind that you were going to use these Quaaludes for young women that you wanted to have sex with? Cosby, yes. Troyani, did you ever give any of those young women the Quaaludes without their knowledge? According to CNN, who obtained the deposition, Cosby's attorney objected and told him not to answer the question. While Cosby did admit that he gained access to 7 prescriptions of Quaaludes with the intention of giving them out to young women he wanted to have sex with, he has not admitted to drugging any of his accusers. According to CNN, Cosby's attorney cited 2 women who allegedly say they knowingly took Quaaludes offered to them by the defendant in the late 1970s. What goes unaddressed is the women who say they were given pills for different reasons, like to cheer up or for medication. More information that comes from the deposition includes: Troyani, did you ever give the Quaaludes to any other female but accuser's name redacted by CNN? Cosby, yes. Troyani, and then you also gave Quaaludes to other women who have not come forward? Cosby, yes. Troyani, you gave them to other people? Cosby, yes. To be fair, Castor did his best to discourage his successors, Furman and eventual lead prosecutor Kevin Steele, from submitting the deposition into evidence for the criminal trial. In the same email where he explained his intent behind the non-prosecutorial agreement, he also said, "I intentionally and specifically bound the Commonwealth that there would be no state prosecution. Knowing this, unless you can make out a case without that deposition and without anything the deposition led you to, I think Cosby would have an action against the county and maybe even against you personally." With hindsight, it was in the interest of both the prosecution and the defense to keep the deposition hidden in the public archive as long as possible, because Cosby's testimony of his own behavior, regardless of the legality, is damning to say the least. According to New York Times, piece in which bits of his deposition are shared, not only did Cosby admit to giving Constand drugs and alcohol, he also hid affairs from his wife, routinely drugged women with Quaaludes as far back as the 60s, paid multiple women hush money, and when asked directly if an alleged victim from 1976 was capable of offering consent after ingesting the Quaaludes, he said, "I don't know." Castor decided to not prosecute Cosby due to defects in the case. Castor was concerned that there wasn't enough evidence to convict, as well as the fact that Constand waited to come forward. According to Vulture, Castor thought Constand's delay reduced her reliability and found inconsistencies in Constand's statements. In a press statement, Castor said, "There was insufficient, credible, and admissible evidence upon which any charge against Cosby related to Constand incident could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Cosby has never admitted to non-consensual sexual contact with any woman, the drugging of any woman, or spiking any drinks." Obviously, if vigorous criminal action were taken against Cosby and the deposition be included, the likelihood of acquittal was slim to none. So, what happened between November 2006 when the settlement was paid and December 2015 when criminal charges were filed for the first time? Hannibal Buress. A clip of the comedian went viral in October 2014 that saw him condemn Cosby for his hypocrisy. Buress said, "He gets on TV. Pull your pants up, black people. I was on TV in the 80s. I can talk down to you because I had a successful sitcom. Yeah, but you rape women, Bill Cosby, so turn the crazy down a couple of notches." The aftermath. That joke alone made Cosby's sexual transgressions headline news once again, and in many ways initiated what became the Me Too movement, which censored hundreds of powerful men across the entertainment, sports, business, and even academia. Although most of those men wouldn't suffer beyond public ridicule, Cosby wasn't so lucky. In the year that followed, the number of women that had accused Cosby of sexual assault had reached 50. The amount would later increase to 60. Cosby's attorneys would call the allegations decade-old and discredited. The fact that they were being repeated does not make them true. Mr. Cosby does not intend to dignify these allegations with any comment. John P. Schmidt, attorney for Mr. Cosby. Cosby was asked about the allegations in an interview on NPR. All Cosby did was shake his head no. In an interview with Florida Today, Cosby said, "I know people are tired of me not saying anything, but a guy doesn't have to answer to innuendos. People should fact check. People shouldn't have to go through that and shouldn't answer to innuendos." The election. Meanwhile, in 2015, former District Attorney Bruce Castor chose to run for the position again after vacating it in 2008. His opponent, Kevin Steele, leveraged a controversy initiated by Barresa's joke to undermine Castor's ability to fulfill his duties as lead prosecutor in their jurisdiction. Steele's campaign ad criticized Castor for not prosecuting Cosby in 2005. Castor defended himself by claiming that Constand's story was inconsistent, thus making her unreliable. In response, Constand sued Castor for 1 count of defamation, 1 count of false light and invasion of privacy. Constand's lawyer will also add that if Castor was elected, Constand would not cooperate in the reopened criminal investigation against Cosby. The race gained so much national attention, Castor told news outlets it's highly suspect that this entire incident is being brought out right before an election. Ultimately, Steele won the election and shortly after announced criminal charges would be pursued against Cosby on behalf of Constand. Breach of the confidentiality clause. According to the New York Times, the parties included in the trial have been prohibited from releasing the deposition due to a confidentiality clause that was part of the original settlement agreement. In the summer of 2015, Constand's lawyer asked to lift the confidentiality clause so Constand herself could release the script. The lawyers argued that the deposition would be made public because Cosby's denial of the allegations over the last few months had violated the agreement. Cosby's lawyers retorted, saying that Constand violated the confidentiality agreement by giving an interview to the Toronto Sun, which was published the same day as Constand's filing. When the deposition was made public, Cosby's attorneys made it known that there was a massive breach of protocol. The court reporter's code of ethics prohibited the release of testimony without all parties being contacted first. Reading the media accounts, one would conclude that the defendant has admitted to rape, and yet the defendant admitted to nothing more than being one of the many people who introduced quaaludes into their consensual sex life in the 1970s. According to the transcript of deposition, Cosby remembered a phone call sometime after the January 2004 incident. His words were, "It was digital penetration." The statement is what led the felony charge of aggravated indecent assault. The trial and sentencing. Charges were officially brought before the Montgomery Court December 30th, 2015, days before the statute of limitations ran out, and Cosby was called to court that same day. This first attempt at a conviction ended in a mistrial on June 17, 2017, as a hung jury failed to convict Cosby on any 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault charges levied against him: penetration without consent, penetration while unconscious, and penetration after administering an intoxicant without the subject's knowledge. According to the New York Times, the jurors deliberated for about 52 hours and could not reach a unanimous verdict. The case was retried in April 2018 after Cosby acquired a new legal team, including Thomas Mercer, who led the defense in the acquittal of Michael Jackson's child molestation trial, but they weren't so lucky the second time. There were several other accusers' testimonies that helped move the case beyond he said, she said. The prosecutors argued that Cosby was a threat to women long before he met Constand, with allegations dating back to the mid-60s. Only one other accuser was allowed to testify during the first trial, held nearly a year earlier. Cosby was found guilty of all 3 charges and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in a maximum security prison plus a $25,000 fine. He and his legal team immediately began the appeals process, citing 11 errors in the trial, including the omission of testimony from 5 bad act witnesses in the attempt to paint Cosby as a serial offender, and ignoring the testimony of former DA Castor, who promised Cosby a criminal trial would never occur. Tragically, though Cosby's misfortune continued, the Superior Court of Pennsylvania upheld the district court's ruling in December 2019, stating the bad act witnesses proved he had a distinct signature pattern, and he was denied parole in June 2021 because he refused to complete sexual violent predator therapy. Cosby maintained his innocence even then and told his attorney he rejected the therapy because accepting it was a tacit admission of guilt. Case overturned. Fortunately for Cosby, an unforeseen twist of fate would see him exonerated. 6 months prior to his failed attempt at parole, Cosby had his initial hearing before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. All 7 justices seemed sympathetic to the arguments made by Cosby's defense and vehemently pressed the prosecution to justify their choice to admit 5 bad act witnesses. At one point, Justice Christine Donahue said, "What are you describing a signature crime? I don't see it. Ironically, though, the courts didn't ask many questions about the very thing which would underpin their decision to free Cosby. In a unanimous decision published June 30th, 2021, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in favor of the defense, citing the initial non-prosecutorial agreement with former DA Castor as the legal basis for their decision. The Supreme Court said that Steele was obligated to stand by his predecessor's promise not to charge Cosby. The state Supreme Court wrote a 79-page opinion stating that due to Castor's agreement that Mr. Cosby would not face charges, he shouldn't have been charged in the first place. It was a 6-1 ruling with 2 of the judges in the majority bearing a retrial. They asserted that admitting the deposition from the civil suit into evidence violated Cosby's Fifth Amendment to remain silent, in which effected violated his 14th Amendment right to due process by exploiting a coerced admission of guilt. For example, Justice Doherty wrote, "By publicly announcing Bill Cosby would not be charged with any crimes related to Andrea Constand, former Montgomery County District Attorney Bruce Castor intended to, and in fact did, force Cosby to give up his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Castor's successor used the damaging evidence Cosby turned over in the civil case to convict him of the same criminal offenses he had previously induced to believe were off the table. I'm constrained to agree with the majority that due process does not permit the government to engage in this type of coercive bait and switch." With that, Cosby was released and absolved of any wrongdoing in relation to Constand. It's not that he definitely didn't do it, it's just that the prosecution failed to prove he definitely did. Of course, the fallout from that decision was not entirely joyful. Cosby Show co-star Felicia Rashad was pressured to resign as dean of Howard University's School of Fine Arts after she publicly expressed support for Cosby in the wake of the news. And, in the strangest coincidence of them all, the guy who essentially ensured Cosby's freedom, Bruce Castor, was Donald Trump's defense attorney during his second impeachment trial. After serving nearly 3 years out of a 3 to 10 year sentence, Cosby flashed a V sign to a helicopter that was flying overhead as he walked into his suburban Philadelphia home. Upon release, Cosby said, "I have never changed my stance nor my story. I have always maintained my innocence. Thank you to all my fans, supporters, and friends who stood by me through this ordeal. Special thanks to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court for upholding the rule of law." According to some sources, Cosby may have the last laugh, as he's considering suing the state of Pennsylvania as compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Stay up to date with the latest news and comedy by subscribing here to our YouTube channel. Follow Comedy Hype across all social media and look out for more all-new original content on our streaming platform at comedyhype.com. Thanks for sticking with us, and for Comedy Hype News, I am Elena Williams with another Comedic Crime Files.